Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about using popular music as a primary source in history. We're going to learn about how historians can gain a lot of insight into the past through looking at music, and also some good questions that we can ask as historians to help us analyze popular music. So, I want to begin with a question for you guys, which is why analyze popular music? Why do you think it's important for historians to look at music from the past? Does it help them understand history in any significant way? Think about it this way. If someone in 100 years wanted to look back and understand what 2020 was like, do you think it would be helpful to look at the music that's popular now? So I want you to pause this video and write what you think in your notebook. Why do you think it's important for historians to analyze popular music? So here are a few potential reasons why historians would be interested in looking at music from the past. So one is music is a really good gateway into people's emotional experiences. So by looking at popular music, we might understand sort of the pain of something like the Great Depression, or the hope that people might have experienced participating in the civil rights movement, or perhaps the visceral anger that protesters might have about issues of police brutality. So music is a really good expressive form for people's emotions. Also, by looking at music from the past, we can get a good sense of how people felt about political issues of the time. So a lot of these popular songs have really compelling political arguments and messages. So by listening to a song about the Vietnam War from the 1960s, we could sort of tell what sort of arguments were being made about that war. Why did people support it? Why were people against it? Why did people think it was the right thing to do? Why did people think it was the wrong thing to do? Furthermore, music has a strong power to shape people's perceptions. So think about it. If a song is a very popular song, like the number one song in the country, that could influence how a lot of people feel about something. So if an anti-Vietnam War song is number one in 1969, that might have a lot of power to get people to be against the war and maybe protest against the war. And this gets to the last point, which is music has historically had a huge role in social movements. So a good example of this was the civil rights movement. There was a song called "We Shall Overcome" that was really popular among protesters in the civil rights era, and people would sing it together, and it would create like a sense of camaraderie, a sense of hope, and a sense of resilience. So music has a really powerful effect in that regard. A good example is of Kendrick Lamar, and this picture is of him performing his song "All Right" at the MTV Video Music Awards. And the song "All Right" became a really popular anthem for the Black Lives Matter movement, which right now is a very potent force in American politics. So if a historian in 100 years wanted to understand the contemporary movement for racial justice in America, "All Right" by Kendrick Lamar might be an interesting song to analyze and listen to. So in this class, we're going to analyze a lot of popular music from the past in order to understand those time periods. So here are a few questions for us to keep in mind as we analyze songs. So one, what is the historical context? When was the song written, and what was happening when that song was written? How do the lyrics reflect current events of the time? A second thing is perspective. Whose perspective is this song written from? Is it from the perspective of a poor person, a wealthy person, someone who's black, someone who's white? Where is this person from geographically? And another thing that's important is the overall message of the song. So, what is the position of the song? What message is it trying to convey? Is it an anti-war song? Is it a song that's criticizing capitalism or wealth inequality? Is it a song that has a message about racial justice? Think about what sort of message the song is trying to put forward. So now that we've learned a little bit about how to analyze popular music as a source, let's practice. So we're going to use a song called "The Message" by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Now this is a pretty interesting song. It's one of the first popular hip-hop songs. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five are from the Bronx. And this song is very much about urban poverty during the 1980s. So I want you to pause the video and you're going to watch this music video. And I want you to think about the lyrics and also the images you see on screen. I want you to think about historical context. So how does this video and music reflect what's going on in America in the 1980s from what you know, and what's going on in New York in the 1980s? I want you to also write down what you think about the perspective of the narrator. So does this person come from a perspective of wealth, poverty? Are they middle class? Are they male? Are they female? Are they black? Are they white? And how does this impact the perspective of the song? I also want you to think about the political message, so the ultimate meaning. So let's talk a little bit about the historical context of this song. So in the song, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five talk a lot about the social and political problems of their Bronx neighborhood. They mention poor sanitation, a lack of jobs and economic opportunities, violence, and drug use. It's important for us to think historically about these issues and not to think that they exist in some sort of vacuum from political events. It's not just that the people that live in these communities are inferior or lazy or bad in any way or deserve what they get. There are structural forces at work that create poverty. So one cause of the social problems that the song depicts is white flight. So white flight is a phenomenon that took place from the 1950s to the 1970s after the Great Migration, in which thousands of African Americans came up from the South to live in the North to build a better life. Many white residents decided to leave the city and move to the suburbs instead. And they did this because they feared that black residents would, bring their properties down. They had fears about crime, a lot of sort of racist assumptions about the new population of people. So they left for these reasons, and because of this, cities lost a lot of economic vitality. They lost a lot of their tax base, and a lot of jobs that used to be in the city left with the white residents and also moved to the suburbs. So this meant that cities had less and less, economic opportunity, and it meant that the black population that was left there was, in a sense, trapped. Another main cause of the urban poverty that Grandmaster Flash talks about was something called redlining. So redlining refers to whenever banks or lending institutions wouldn't give loans to people in black and brown neighborhoods. So as you can see from this map, this is a map that a bank might have, and certain areas are marked off, and these are areas with majority black residents. And so the banks would just say, we're not going to loan to the people that live here because of the color of their skin. And this created a huge racial wealth gap between black and white citizens. Because think about it, like if you're white, you can go to the bank and say, oh, I want a mortgage. And then they'd give you the mortgage, and then you can buy a house and you can pay it back over time. And then by the end, you own property. For black residents, they couldn't own property as easily because they couldn't get these mortgages because of the color of their skin and because of where they lived. This was one big reason why black residents couldn't follow white residents to go live in the suburbs. And a similar phenomenon to redlining is something called restrictive covenants. So this is when people living in white neighborhoods would make deals with their neighbors never to sell their house to black people. So this was also a reason why black residents couldn't own houses as easily or couldn't move to the suburbs and were essentially trapped in cities that were economically falling apart, essentially. So as you can see, it's not the cause. The cause is not the moral failing of the people living in the city. It's because they were barred from obtaining wealth because of institutional practices like redlining. And this wealth gap between black and white people in the United States still exists, and redlining is a big cause of it. Another reason for the urban problems depicted in Grandmaster Flash's song is that New York City was in a state of fiscal crisis around the time that the song was written. So only maybe 5 or 6 years before, in 1976, New York City practically went bankrupt. The mayor of New York City actually had to go to Washington and ask President Gerald Ford for the federal government to bail the city out. And Ford said no. So this is a famous newspaper headline. It says, "Ford to City, drop dead." So because of the bankruptcy crisis, New York City had to fire a lot of city workers. They had to disinvest from a lot of communities. They had to slash budgets. And so poor communities really rely on a lot of these city services. So places like the Bronx, which the song depicts, sort of suffered because of a lot of cuts in city budgets. In addition, on the national scale, Ronald Reagan had just become president. And a big part of Ronald Reagan's plans and ideology was something called fiscal conservatism. So what this means is he believed that you should cut taxes, especially for the wealthy, and cut a lot of social programs, especially programs that help the poor and working class. So as we can see, on both a local level, there was a lot of less investment in poor communities, and on a federal level, there was a lot less investment because a lot of these programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid were being threatened by the Reagan administration. So let's think a little bit about the perspective of the artist, the perspective of the narrator. So it, as we've talked about, is from the perspective of the urban poor, specifically the Bronx in New York City. That's where Grandmaster Flash was from. It's also very much the perspective of young black men, say, in their early to mid-20s. That's about how old Grandmaster Flash was. And you can really hear this in the music. It has this kind of like restless energy. Think about being a young person, you know? You want to get out in the world, you want to have opportunities, you want to feel a sense of purpose, and all around you, you see no opportunities, no purpose. And so there's this kind of like sense of being, you know, a young person who is supposed to have their whole lives ahead of them, but feeling trapped instead, you know? He's like, it's like a jungle sometimes. I wonder, you know, if I'm going to go under, you know? So the sense of like enclosure of being young and wanting to be free, but feeling trapped and feeling like you have no choices is a big part of this song. What's really interesting about hip hop as it relates to this time is that it was mostly these, you know, poor young black men who were the pioneers of hip hop as a genre. I guess feeling as though there were no opportunities for them in other realms of employment. They focused on artistic expression and created one of the most important artistic movements probably that the world has ever seen as a result. So even though there were all of these, you know, forces stacked against them, like poverty and structural problems and, you know, a failing education system, they still managed to express themselves and push against these forces. So hip hop was a way to sort of fight their oppression and economic marginalization, which is really interesting. All right, finally, let's talk about the political message of the song. So, importantly, the song really talks about the psychological stress of poverty. So, not only does poverty limit your opportunities or, you know, make it so that you might not have enough food to eat or a place to live, all of these things also make you just miserable psychologically. So the chorus, he goes, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge," right? So he feels like he's just so close to breaking down, you know, not being able to take it anymore. All of these sort of, you know, problems that are piling up on him because of his poverty. The song is also a criticism of what is called trickle-down economics. So trickle-down economics was the policy of Ronald Reagan, who was president at the time the song was written. And his idea was if we just cut the taxes of the wealthy by a lot, then eventually all the money that they save will somehow trickle down to the poor people because the rich people will spend a lot of money and ultimately this will be good for everyone. So as you can see from the song and the video, the Grandmaster Flash doesn't really seem to think trickle-down economics is working so well. right? The money isn't trickling down. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So it's this criticism of this idea that somehow if we cut the taxes of the wealthy, everyone will benefit, right? Another criticism in the song is of the idea of the American dream, right? So in the song, there's this pervading hopelessness, right? The narrator doesn't think that he'll ever be able to get out of this place, that he'll ever be able to find a good job or, find fulfillment. He's kind of living without hope and he's in despair. This is very different from the idea of the American dream, which is that no matter what, no matter who you are, if you work hard, you eventually can make it in America. And obviously, Grandmaster Flash in the song doesn't see that as true for him and his community. This goes very much into a campaign ad that Reagan had called Morning in America, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So I want you to pause this video and watch what is called the Morning in America ad. And this was part of Ronald Reagan's 1984 presidential campaign. And it shows a very, optimistic view of American life. So I want you to watch this and I want you to contrast it with what's shown in the message. How is the America that Ronald Reagan wants to portray in this ad different from the America that Grandmaster Flash wants to portray? And what might we learn by making this contrast? What is the political purpose of this contrast between Reagan's idea of America and Grandmaster Flash's idea of America? So now that we've practiced analyzing music from the past, I want you to do it on your own. So for your homework, I'd like you to choose a song that you enjoy that has a political message. It can be a current song. It could be a song from the past. I want you to write a paragraph analyzing it. And I want you to talk about historical context. So how do the lyrics reference current events of the time, what was happening at the moment? Think about perspective. So where is the narrator from? What is their racial identity? What is their class identity? And how does that inform the song's content? And finally, I want you to think about the political message. So what is the song trying to say about the time period, about politics, about what it's like to live in this era? So I look forward to reading what you guys have to say and to listening to these very interesting political songs. So thank you guys so much. Have a great night. Thank you.